Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Royal Drawing School's Creative Conversation series. This is the last event in our series this year, and I'm really delighted that we're joined by three artists, Sam Messer, Mary Reid Kelley, and Patrick Kelley. They're long-standing friends, and together they'll be discussing poetry, animation, and the life of the artist. So to introduce them a little more, Mary Reid Kelley and Patrick Kelley are joining us from upstate New York, where they live and work. And their work combines painting, performance, and Mary's distinctive wordplay-rich poetry in polemical, graphically stylized videos. Mary and Patrick's videos have been exhibited in solo exhibitions at the Fabric Workshop and Museum in Philadelphia, at Tate Liverpool, the Baltimore Museum of Art, the High Line, New York, among many other venues. And their work has been widely reviewed in the New York Times, The Guardian, the Frieze, and many others. Their 2016 film, Is Offal, won the Baloise Prize at Art Basel. And Mary is a 2016 MacArthur Fellow. Sam Messer has been exhibiting paintings, sculptures, prints, and animations for 4 decades. He's become known for creating iconic bodies of work and for collaborating with writers, including with Dennis Johnson, Paul Auster, Jonathan Safran Foer, and Sharon Olds. And one example of such collaborations is his animation to the poem Lockdown by brother Richard Hendricks, a Franciscan monk who lives in Ireland. His reading of the poem featured on the BBC in 2020 during the first lockdown. Sam Messer's work can be found in major collections, including the Whitney Museum, the Met, and the Museum of Fine Art in Houston. He taught at the Yale School of Art for 25 years and was the Associate Dean. And it was during that tenure that he first met Mary Reid Kelley as a graduate student. So welcome to you all, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. Hi, Sam.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
And just before you begin, I just want to remind the audience that, of course, as usual, you're very welcome to add questions and comments in the chat or Q&A box, and we'll come back to those and address them at the end of the talk. Thank you.
So should we start?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
so you guys want to start?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Well, so I guess we wanted to each maybe talk a little bit about our own work and animation and how drawing plays a role in everything we do. But we've also known each other for, I guess, over 12 or 13 years, and so we wanted to talk a little bit about our relationship and how we influenced each other and have it's kind of gone back and forth over these years. So anyways, we thought we'd take you back to where we first met, and this was my studio as a graduate student at the Yale School of Painting, where I met Sam. And so here, and we can talk a little bit about this, but at the time I got really interested in poetry and words, and I was making drawings with words, like 2D work. And with Pat's help, I started making animations, and Pat has a background in photography and video, and so he was able to help me get going on it. And this is the title sequence to one of our early videos, Sadie the Saddest Sadist. And this is we're just going to show the title sequence here, but that's actually what I was making in what we just saw. And Sadie the Saddest Sadist is just a very simple performed video, and I perform both the characters and I speak in this poem, this verse that I wrote. And at the time we were also making rubbings and basically just really entering into the world of language and how, and drawing. Yeah, sure. And and you want to go forward one more. So here's one. When I met Sam, actually Sam started we got to know each other partly because Sam started helping me figure out how to make these rubbings, like figure out what the paper should be and what the crayons should be. And so anyways, I was making these rubbings that were kind of poems composed on the spot at a memorial. And so, you know, you go to the war memorial and you read the names, you read whatever text is describing the event or the people that are being memorialized. And I would read the text and then kind of compose a counter text. And in this one, the text on the memorial was by General John Pershing, and he was talking about the qualities of his soldiers and how brave they were and strong and how virile they were. And of course, you know, in the years since the memorial went up, virile has taken a more distinctively sexual tone. And so that's what I was kind of had a giggle when I first saw the word virile in the memorial. And so I composed this text out of John Pershing's laudatory text. The American soldier is physically strong and virile, aggressive and virile, loyal and virile, hurried and virile and seemingly insurmountably virile. And yeah, I don't know, Sam, I have a lot of great memories about you helping me make these drawings.
Well, what I have here is this drawing, which is hard to see, but it says Sam It Works.
Yeah.
And that was at that time when I met Mary, we talked about making white on black. And so I bought paper for you and left it for you. And then you made that little rubbing and left it under my door to tell me that, yes, the paper actually worked.
Yeah.
But, you know, more than that, when I wanted you to show that first one of you making with the letters moving, because that really inspired me to think about making animations. Up until that point, I never had thought about it. Oh, that's not true. When I was a teenager, I made one with a wind-up camera that I've totally forgotten about. It was like a balloon moving. But other than that, I'd never thought about it again until I started seeing you do that. And I had been working on the Dennis the Pirate, but I was making it as a book.
Right.
And then when I saw that, I started to think, because I was looking on my iPhone, how things started to move. And so I was also really intrigued by how low tech it was.
Yeah.
You know, so it seemed like a possibility and a way to kind of just animate the drawings and because I was also dealing with a story to think about, okay, how could I add that to a language?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
So,
the power of a sequence, of one image after another. It's really not very different from a book.
Right.
yeah. And just, you know, that low tech, watching you do that. And then there was my friend Mike Rader, who I used to see teach, was working at an art store in the basement. He was always like had a phone, and he loved the basement because no one came down there, but he was always taking pictures, and he also made very low tech animations. So those two things really got me inspired.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, because, and then now you're teaching. I was a teacher.
you're retired on a giant stack of laurels. I mean, it's interesting for me to sit here with both of you, because I think between the two of you, I can't imagine two different people that had a greater influence on me or taught me more about being an artist. And I really did want to ask you both to talk about your teaching style, but I guess like I kind of wanted to give just a description of what it was like to be taught by Sam. And I always said to myself that I thought you were the best teacher I ever saw, the best art teacher I ever saw in action. And like both for my peers in graduate school, so like a little more advanced, older, but also like seeing you teach younger students at Norfolk. And all the qualities you might think you wanted to have in a teacher, like someone to, like, you know, helping me with the paper, helping me figure out kind of the basics of materials or how to execute something. But I guess the thing that really made you totally different from any other teacher I've ever, not only ever had, but ever seen, is like you created this atmosphere of just excitement and momentum. And like, that's so valuable because, you know, you set that tone right away of this, just like, go forward, do it, jump in. You don't need to like check yourself. You don't need to like plan your move, just like jump in with both feet, and especially move towards anything that's really exciting. Because what I was about to get into in school was poetry, and I had never studied poetry, certainly never written any of it. And I had all the same doubts that a lot of art students, like doubts in your ability, doubts that you'd be able to like read a challenging text or figure out something new. But like what I learned from you and what you brought to the school was this feeling of like, you can teach yourself anything, you can learn anything, you can master anything if you're excited enough.
Mhm.
So that's what it felt like to be in a school when you were there.
Well, it's really moving for you to say that, because I must say that as a teacher, I always couldn't figure out what my role was or what I should be doing, or even what a teacher was, because I hated school. But you know, and now that I'm not doing it anymore, maybe Pat, you could talk about this, is I started to think after I left that what a really good teacher is there's a certain amount of information you can give, technical information that you know and that you can pass on that's valuable in different degrees to people. But beyond that, it's really just this continuation of telling stories that, and so I realized that I was telling you all stories that my teachers had told me.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, I think it's time for me, you know, it was time for me to become just part of, a lot of my old students now are teaching and running institutions, for them to tell stories and I could be part of those stories.
Yeah.
The thing about giving the paper, I must give a little shout out to John Walker, who was an English artist and one of my earliest teachers at Cooper, who just said, come to my studio, and didn't say why. And when I got there, he didn't let me in. He opened the door and he just handed me this roll of paper and like shooed me on the way. And it was this chrome coat paper, which then I carried with me, and I made the first Red Darkness drawings with.
Yeah.
And so I realized how important that was. You know, and I think Catherine Goodman, who runs the Royal Drawing School, also has that same attitude. So, you know, I'm glad it worked for you. I think for others, maybe not so much. What about you, Pat? You've been teaching a long time too.
Well, I was just thinking what you said about not really knowing what your role was supposed to be, which to me seems like an ideal place. Like you're able to actually be in the moment rather than take on a certain position that is I don't know, preordained position as a teacher. And something I admire about what I've witnessed as your teaching style, if that's the right word, is this mode of collaboration where like the excitement really comes from feeling like you're collaborating with other artists, whether they're students or other art or peers. And to generate that kind of excitement in a teaching environment is truly invaluable. And I think that just really comes from a kind of humble lack of positioning oneself in some sort of hierarchy, and instead rather being a collaborator among collaborators, and getting excited by other people's ideas and then bouncing ideas back and forth. And that was always the most satisfying kind of teaching, to call it teaching for me.
Yeah, yes, because I would also say that it's knowing what you don't want to do more than maybe what you do want to do. Because like I knew from my past experience why I didn't like being in school, that I didn't want to shut anyone down. And often the things that I learned from Jake Berteau was the things you're most embarrassed by are usually your best work, and was just to really get people to go to that place, you know, so it wasn't looking like someone else's. But maybe that's enough about teaching.
Yeah, should we?
Yeah, why don't you show the next how you make your things, and then I'll show a little.
Okay, so do you want to go to another rubbing?
Yeah.
So a few more rubbings?
Yes, just a few more rubbings. This was a memorial poem that I found, and changed every word to every noun that was in the poem that wasn't death, I changed to death.
Is this from the Yale?
No,
No.
this is something that was in Rome, and I'm not sure what to say about this. So I mean, this comes from a memorial to a racehorse, the racehorse Seabiscuit, which had a movie made about it a couple years ago. Anyways, there's literally a memorial to Seabiscuit the racehorse in Saratoga Springs where we lived, and it had all these wonderful words like physical prowess and intelligent, and like talked about how great the horse was. So anyways, I just made this kind of word based on this poem based on the words that were already there. And I like working off of this. To me, like using words that are already there, it's kind of like working with the materials that you have. It is kind of a drawing technique, I think, of just like working with the pencil and the paper, whatever you already have, and like trying to do something with it. But and Pat wanted to show one of his videos.
Yeah, I was just going to show a couple of my animations because in particular these where I'm just setting things up in the studio, and in this case doing some camera tracking. But I always thought of these as kind of like drawings when I'm doing these arrangements on the floor. But then combining them with camera tracking, and the reason I'm showing this camera tracking stuff is that this is just an example of my experimenting with some technique, technical digital technique, and playing with it, really just sort of seeing what might happen. And then that later coming in and being brought into the work that Mary and I collaborate on.
But you think of those as like a drawing,
I do
right?
think of them as drawings.
Like a sketch.
Yeah, like a little sketch. And I just keep doing these things. And part of that I wanted to show out of just the notion of learning by doing, which I think is an important thing. I think Sam has talked about this as well, just like the value of learning by just getting going and experimenting. And I think drawing is just the elemental medium for that. And so I think of these arrangements as kind of a drawing. And then the experimentation that came from that, of this kind of camera tracking technique, we used just recently in this recent video of ours, The Rape of Europa, which was at the Gardner Museum in Boston. So this is a shot just showing what it looks like in our studio when we were shooting this footage, and you see all this stuff going on with all these markers. And what that allowed me to do is take that footage and create a virtual camera with the same movements in this digital set, which is what you're seeing here. So that's the background in our digital set made in a 3D environment. And what this is just the same clip again, but kind of showing a process of going from the raw footage to the set.
Women invented agriculture, said Europa cornily.
And I kind of think of this, the camera tracking thing is kind of reclaiming technological filming processes back into drawing and back into kind of a loose, freehand sort of movement. But the other thing I wanted to show were some of the drawings that Mary made for this same set that we're talking about in this recent project, The Rape of Europa. So maybe you want to say something about these?
Yeah, that really quite elaborate set that Pat made for Europa's background, and it's kind of a post-apocalyptic version of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum's courtyard, which is normally very beautiful. And so it was post-apocalyptic, so we wanted to have all this graffiti. So hopefully we're like making the full circle between like drawing, like Pat's describing, using the camera movement is kind of almost like the camera is following the line drawing, making this movement that establishes the character of the camera itself. And then these like literal actual drawings that I made these on paper with an airbrush and tried to make them look kind of like they were made with a can of spray paint, but of course they're small. They're small enough so Pat can scan them and then kind of pattern them onto the digital set that he made. And this is just more graffiti. And these are, of course, gigs from Great Britain and from Ireland. And just wanted to show them because I'm sure you know about them and they're cool. But
and so this is just an overview of that set that I was showing you that had the shot of the Europa character. So this is looking at the full set in the 3D environment with all the details. But you'll see once the full image comes back that there are these textures, and these are all provided by Mary. So these are a couple stills from the video that show those graffiti marks put up on the walls on kind of fake pieces of plywood behind the main character. So this is something we've been doing in our work together for years, where Mary gives me drawings and textures that I incorporate into the 3D set. So even like the blankets draping those sculptures, those are little paintings that Mary gave me in a 2D form, and then I mapped them onto these various 3D objects, so that oftentimes in some of our works, every single digital surface is a painted surface via Mary's work beforehand.
And I mean, and this way of expressing a character with this black and white paint with an outline and like a very flat look. I think just when we started making video years ago, we just wanted them to look like moving drawings, like there really wasn't like the character and the background were completely seamless, like they existed on the same piece of paper. And yeah, I guess the last thing we wanted to show was oftentimes, so I just finished these and I really enjoy this. This is kind of the final stage of making a film. And at the end, I get to make drawings of the characters that we made to look like drawings. And to me, it's like a great way of like returning them to like an original state of being a drawing. And I always am grateful that Pat and I developed this method of working, because I think at the end it helps me make the drawings that I really want to make, which are these kind of really strange and elaborate costumed figures. Yeah.
You know, seeing all this makes me really, all of a sudden I started thinking that you two are such in the tradition of modernism, really. That, well, to me, I'm thinking like Cubism, the early 1900s, where you first started your drawings, which was this kind of collision of different technologies meeting culture, meeting, actually thinking about old form, meeting new form, like always trying to push forwards, but retaining something of kind of without thinking about that technology, you know, not showing it, which, you know, is kind of the genius within the work, is that your drawing is so simple. You know, it's a very basic drawing.
Yes.
You know, but then what what you're able to do with that, forgetting even about the language, just visually, by incorporating all that into a real space, is really phenomenal. And, you know, maybe I'll show this little clip of Dennis the Pirate, because this was something that I started thinking about too at the time when I was making this. I got a job and I designed these monster creatures for the movie Noah, Darren Aronofsky's film. And I wound up working with ILM. So they took my sculptures and scanned them and made them this really high-tech thing. And I really decided I didn't want high-tech. So everything in the movie is just like the earliest things I saw you two doing was copy stand, right? Just picture. And this is actually a shadow that the light was changing on a window.
Yeah.
And I started to think about this scene, which is in the film, is like an 18-second clip. It took me about 2 years. And I originally thought the whole movie was just going to be the pirate and Babe Ruth the monkey dancing, because I didn't want to line it up with the narrative. But then over time, I slowly embraced and I fully embraced the narrative. So this just became this this midsection
Mhm.
where it like transitioned in the film. But that idea of having kind of a low tech way of making things move without bringing in all this other ideas that I'm not only don't know how to do, but I'm really not that interested in for my own work.
Yeah.
I really learned that when I worked on that film set. And this particularly in Dennis the Pirate, Dennis set the story in the 1700s, and etchings was the way that people actually shared images back then. You know, it was one of the first kind of way to reproduce an image and share it. So I really thought it was actually kind of a great way to do this. It took me 8 years to make, because and I used to do this when I was teaching at night. I would go into the thing, but that idea of scrolling across, and this is why I think it's interesting for people that are wanting maybe to make animations, that it doesn't have to be high tech. I saw on my iPhone when I started swiping from one image in the etching to the next, it started to move. So a lot of that was one plate that I would just re-etch and just keep changing the plate. And just so there's like one print of each one of these.
Yeah. No, this is like such a monumental amount of labor, and like to see an animation that's all etchings like this, I really don't think I've seen anything like this.
No, it's like 1,700 etchings.
Yeah, I think you stand alone in that.
And then at one point I made it, it was all black and white, and then Eleanor looked at it and I had hand colored like a couple, and she said, oh, the color is really, maybe it should be in color. So then I had to reprint them all and start over.
See, that's what happens when you start collaborating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If someone has a great idea, you're always like, damn. Now
You know, my collaboration is different than yours because you are collaborating with your own words and your own voice. So like what I do for this, you know, I was fortunate enough to have Liev Schreiber do the narration for me, and Colin Stetson and Sarah Neufeld gave me music. And I was able to put that together. My other animations, I just steal things off the internet. I steal music or words. I think I was always inspired by that book. I don't know if you know that book, The Family of Man. I think Museum of Modern Art put out like in the 60s. And as a kid, it just had like lines of poems or sayings next to photographs.
Yeah.
And I just like, that changed me.
Really?
Yeah, that's a good point.
You know, I think that like your style of, I think you're right that our styles of collaboration are different. And yours always seemed to me to be like a practice in the art of friendship. Like these are people that you know and you admire. And it's like kind of your way when you know and admire someone, like to collaborate with them. So
Well, I think, yeah, because I always did this when you were in school. I would teach this drawing class, and afterwards, I learned this from Aja Junkers. After class, the best thing to do is go to a bar, and I added drawing to it.
yeah.
But I use drawing, and we could talk about, maybe we should move into just talking about drawing, because I use drawing as a way to move through the world. I don't use it as the way a lot of other people do, is maybe to figure out a project or figure, you know, to dissect composition. I just use it as basically a conversation with my day. So I always kind of just draw all the time.
Yeah.
And it's a way to meet people. So when I finally meet people that I'm interested in, it's a way to actually just spend time and sit down. It's like having a meal with them. Maybe we could show, and then you could talk, but the little clip I did, this was another way, you know, I only use eye motion, but I would show not this clip, I would show the lockdown clip. And so before you start it, I would just say that a friend of mine shared from the BBC the audio of Brother Hendricks reading his lockdown poem. He's a Franciscan monk, lives in Dublin. And I started working on this for a long time. I was just really moving. These are all made from drawings that I shoot on my phone using eye motion. And then at a certain point, someone else helped me find him, and I found him through Facebook and then Instagram. And we actually Zoomed and talked at like 2 in the morning or 5 in the morning, like his time.
Wow. Yeah, and I really love these. And it's funny because we got a tiny glimpse on the screen of one of your Donald Trump animations, which, you know, you spent, again, the whole presidency making these like almost diaristic daily entries into like what was going on in the news that day. And so it just felt like such a change to see these lockdown poems, and they're like, so the tone is like so different and so beautiful and poetic. Did it feel really different to be making those two different bodies of work?
Yeah, well, after the political ones, the Years of the Cock ones,
Yeah.
which was a way for me to deal with everything that was going on. I would make those in a day, usually watching the news. It was kind of horrific, but then when I decided I really didn't want to do that anymore, and I only wanted to make more positive, and when I found this lockdown poem, it really made me think, okay, this is actually a much better way to spend my time and energy, and into something that's much more positive.
Yeah.
And particularly, we're all in that moment around the world in that moment. And so, yeah, it was just something I spent a long time. I spent maybe a month and a half making the drawings for this and reworking it. And then I remember when I spoke to Brother Richard, he gave me some ideas, like there's a part in that where you actually hear people singing, which was happening around the world, where people were singing at a certain hour. And so he said, well, why don't you use some of those singings when Tell Me This City, you know? And I went to Assisi. Those drawings in there are Assisi because he was a Franciscan monk. So we talked about what it meant for him to be both a poet and to be a monk. It was really, yeah, it was a great collaboration too. And that's why I like working with other writers or finding a text, because it gives me something to collide with that isn't just my own kind of neuroses.
Yeah, I find that too. Like you said, the text in our pieces, I write them, but they always come out of, I have these kind of favorite poets that I return to over and over, and I always think of the poems that I write as kind of a collaboration with them in the form of parody. Like what I write is kind of a hybrid parody of like usually Swinburne, Poe, and Thomas Hood. They're kind of my problematic kings. And like I say problematic because, you know, they're all 19th century guys. They've all got, you know, some very twisted stories and viewpoints. And but in a way, I feel like that in responding to them, I get to kind of talk back to them. And so it's not like an uncritical friendship. It can be like trying to redeem them, or I don't know.
Well, we're in that moment where it's really interesting to deal with words and deal with language.
Yeah.
And just how the meanings of things are changing, and what's allowed to be said, or how one says anything.
Right.
So, you know, you actually, I think, responding to a lot of that text, and also I think what I've always admired is how you find a certain form, like the limericks that you wrote for Dennis the Pirate at one point, for, you know, in response to that, for an article, you know, reminds me of, like, I've been making some work with Sharon Olds, who moves from odes to ballads to strict forms, and then is just totally free within that form.
Mm-hmm.
But so there's always that kind of connection though to the past. So when you're like, when we look at your work, we always have to think about how that original work was made, and say what was surrounding that work, and how you, as who you two are now, you know, engaging with that. So it makes us, you know, makes me think about how I think back on that work too.
Yeah.
Or what I wasn't looking at, which was what you did in Boston was particularly enlightening about that.
Right. I mean, and so the Rape of Europa is made almost entirely out of limericks. And when you've got a recognizable form like a limerick, in a way, you can't write a limerick without collaborating with every single other limerick that exists. And everyone in their mind, you know, even if they don't have a limerick memorized, they know what it sounds like. So you're collaborating with their expectations of what a limerick is, and you can kind of align with those expectations, or confound or confront them. And that's actually, you could, I think, expand that to include language in general, and that we have to live in language every day, and we have to, strap language into a cart and make it work for us, like we're making it work for us right now, like trying to talk in a manner that can be understood. But really, language is a collaboration with, millions of dead people and the way that they spoke. And like you said, we're changing language daily, and it's the nature of language to change. That's why it's difficult or challenging to read Shakespeare. That's why it's even difficult to, read Swinburne, because he sounds so Victorian. It's so elaborate. There's so many rhymes. It almost seems like indecent, because like we're trained by modernism that, that's way too much flowery language. So yeah, I really like that, just kind of collaboration through time, because it reminds you that you don't own it, and you can't keep something in a static state.
And things change over time, like just how you were talking in the beginning of the talk about the word virile.
Yeah.
Right? How it was used then, how it was used when you first made that piece, how to think about it now.
Yeah.
I'm going to show one more thing, but before I do that, what's on the screen, for people, a lot of this I also learned through the political ones, but this one was how to just draw on my phone. So like this bird moving across, the color, all this was just added on the phone. So a lot of the drawing technically is that. But can we just show the New Year animation? It's really short. Not this one, that was the Trump, and not that, that was this one.
Happy New Year!
So,
Party Z.
What I wanted to just say, and this goes really to thinking about like how language changes. I've been working with this iconic form, the typewriter, for 20 years now. And originally it started in a direct response to Paul Auster's typewriter. But in the last, particularly started thinking about when the political animation started, how the typewriters as an icon really quickly changed into actually speaking to history and just trying to communicate with someone else. And now I'm really starting to think about the words that go on, and just how things will change very quickly, unfortunately, but how the language is so important, right? And that's where this quote is, the United States of amnesia, just trying to think about remembering.
Yeah.
And you, Mary, you want to talk maybe a little bit more about how you write some of your things, because that's always been your wordplay, is clearly.
Yeah, I mean, it's partly compulsion, and I think if you can because it's compulsive, it's happening all the time, and it takes some effort to notice when you have a compulsion. And but it's like, to go back to standing in front of that panel and kind of giggling at the word virile, I've tried to learn to, when I giggle at stuff, when I'm reading something, and sometimes I think I read something backwards and I get the meaning wrong, and it's got some kind of, double entendre. And so basically I try to write those down, like whenever something strikes me as funny or sounds weird, or my brain plays it back and it's got a different spin on the words. And so I really do think it's happening in my brain, and it was just a matter of paying attention to it, and learning to pay attention to it, and learning to not hate that part, because it makes you weird.
Well, I was thinking of it as you've talked about it before, as reading sort of disrespectfully,
Yeah.
or not obeying the text as it's
Right.
supposed to be delivered to you as you're reading,
Yeah.
and noticing those moments when you're tripping, and
Right.
actually being like, oh, there's something interesting there that's
Right.
not the overt message of the text, but actually is a more interesting thing that has possibility for you as a writer.
Yeah, because, and it's, when you're in front of a war memorial or something like that, or even like if you're standing in front of like a Renaissance masterwork painting or something, there's a specific tone that the institution wants you to take, like a tone of reverence, a tone of awe, solemnity, like very serious, you know. And I always think it's good to notice, like, whenever there's a strong institutional push for a certain type of tone, and there's usually quite a bit of humor to be had if you don't obey in those situations.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to me, your work has always involved this idea of slippage between like what one expects and a certain kind of properness to the form, and then it slips into, say, the body, or it slips into another place which allows for people to bring their own experience. I just think when you got that grant at Yale to go and you did all the rubbings of the World War I soldiers from their tombstones, just the image of you like on your knees rubbing their tombstones was so kind of erotic, sensual, and so kind of weird.
Yeah.
That, you know, that itself, you know, fit into actually, and then the poem you came back with and thinking about it and just thinking about that kind of slippage between being really proper, being really kind of hyper intellectual is also very much the way you make the work. That's what I was talking about earlier. You know, your low tech kind of drawing, which you do on purpose. Because those early drawings, I have one of those of Lincoln, you know, which are highly rendered. But so this choice of a certain kind of drawing, which, you know, John Searle, who was that old self-taught artist I taught, once said, I practice being naive because I know that's what people like. I mean, you in a lot of ways practice being naive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then that kind of decision matched with what you two do together gives it a certain edge, you know. And that's, you know, that's something that I find really interesting in being able to make moving into animation with my drawings now. It's not just this like observation and drawing, but it gives me a way to then work on top of it and to reflect and to add like on the phone or some other way. It's kind of like printmaking. It's very much like printmaking where you actually can add a layer of process. So you have that initial kind of loose, just subconscious way of responding to being present and then adding something to it.
Yeah.
I mean, I really like that statement by John Searle. And I was kind of ask you as kind of like a kind of end of conversation if you think that, to me, there's like a thematic connection where we're all describing how drawing is not just like a pencil on a paper, but it's like a methodology of exploration. And I think it's also like being committed to drawing, like having drawing as being like a fundamental mode, to me means being kind of a professional amateur, always being in that state of naivete, because it's the position with the most freedom. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean,
and the most freedom means the most excitement. It means the least self-doubt.
And that freedom, we extend that to the videos too. We're always resisting sort of ideologies of the tools we're using, the technical tools, the digital tools, to go back to this kind of practicing naivete.
Yes.
And making things look like a camera pointed at a vaudeville set kind of thing, with crude set pieces and things made out of plywood. But
I also think for me, it's a way of just paying attention. It's like, you know, I've been sitting here drawing you all and not thinking that it's going to be a very good drawing, but it's a way for me to actually to stay. For a lot of other people, when I was a kid in school, I would get in trouble because people thought I was not paying attention or distracted, but it's actually a way for me to focus on really looking and to really see like what's behind you in the space and to really understand what's going on. And it's also been my way of meeting people.
Yeah.
Which then leads me to the next maybe work that I do.
Yeah. Yeah, and like by amateurism, I mean, both of you are like incredibly skilled and subtle. It's not about being scared to acquire a skill, but it's also as you acquire skill to like acquire the co-skill of not taking the skill so seriously that it kind of stunts the way you use the skill.
Right.
Well, Louis Armstrong, I've always loved this, said when he got a trumpet that he didn't want to learn how to play the trumpet. He wanted to teach the trumpet to sound like the way he talked.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, as a teacher, it's like, yeah, you can give all these skills and you accumulate techniques so that you know what you don't want to use.
Right.
You know, and that's how you can practice being naive, is because you can discard. You can discard techniques, right?
Right.
And, you know, the fact that we're even talking about animation when I was going to school, that kind of drawing was like ceramics, right? No one wasn't allowed in an art institution, wasn't allowed in a higher way of thinking or talking. And now it's, this idea is totally embraced, as it should be, but it also allows for a way of thinking and engaging and just recording.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to show us one more image of something? And then maybe we stop?
Yeah. Well, you're mentioning the you're mentioning Mary doing the rubbings. I did just sort of bank away a few other images. That one. Try to quickly. This is an image of Mary doing some rubbings, and this is at a I taught when Mary was at Yale. I taught. I was teaching at St. Mary's College of Maryland, which is on the far southern tip of Maryland, which is the very point of that southern tip of Maryland is a Confederate, former Confederate prisoner of war camp. And this was a memorial down there that listed all of the soldiers who died there. And so one of the times when Mary was there at home, we drove over there.
Yeah.
And she did a whole series of rubbings using the names.
And it's just like responding to what's there, like you're always doing, you know, drawing what's in front of you, what you're looking at. But I mean, I guess I feel I'm not the one who, you know, invented like sexualizing war. I mean, war really operates on this highly gendered, in this highly gendered field, and of course with you know, the handsome war dead and all the types of attention and like memorialization. It's like this art pre-sexualized, sublimated attitude. So I feel like this is just really bringing out what's latent already in the memorial rather than like adding a sexual dimension that's not there.
So I'm going to throw a question that we hadn't talked about, but I asked you this years ago. You know, those political cartoons and my animations really are in the moment.
Yeah.
Why have you stayed always referring to things past? Like, what is your benefit in your thinking in that?
You know, it's interesting because I feel like in the picture of Europa that we just showed a little bit of from that Pat showed, you know, I feel like with her character, she really doesn't belong in the past. Like, to me, I mean, the short answer is like, why in the past? It's because ideas don't come from nowhere. They come from a place in time. They come from people in time, people that know each other and are working on the same ideas. So if you want to, like, I learn about modernism, that was one of the big themes that we were dealing with in the First World War video. You know, it's a historical time-based phenomenon. And I feel like it was good training to like recognize ideology and intellectual history in the past to do it in the present. And so somebody like Europa, you know, she's wearing a lanyard, she's got a stylish haircut, she's wearing office clothes that have been shredded.
Mhm.
And I think, again, I think it was kind of training in a way. Like, we're still really interested in the past and don't actually see a whole lot of difference. Like, you know, I guess we're both people that think that the past isn't really in the past, that we're constantly living in, we're living in and reconstructing the past as ways to get through the present and ways to justify our actions in the present. So there's that, but yeah, more contemporary figures have started to pop up in what we're doing.
And I think in the recent piece, this that we're showing the stills from, The Rape of Europa, this main set for the Europa character pictured was really a way to kind of conflate the present, past, and future. I mean, all of the graffiti are things that Mary culled from sort of prehistoric cave paintings and carvings. All of they're ancient and put into a sort of post-apocalypse set. So it was this sort of this mashing together.
Yeah, I love this particular because of that, because it clearly brings the two together. It reminds me of Julian Barnes and The History of the World in 10.5 chapters, where he talked about when people went back into the Colosseum after not being there in 200 years, and how all the plants and everything had grown, you know, that had been brought from all over the world. But I also thought in her pubic hair, the stylization of that seemed very contemporary.
Wow.
I noticed that.
I mean, actually, I don't really know how contemporary it is now. It's more like,
I know, but it's like a reference to a contemporary kind of. It's probably been around forever.
yeah,
Right.
yeah. I think people have always been very creative with that kind of presentation.
That was been a medium.
Well, on that note, should we take questions?
Sure, if there are any.
Thank you all so much. It's been so inspiring to be taken through your work and gain this sense of the breadth of what drawing can be, and sort of how drawings can move, making drawing move. It's been really fascinating. So yes, to the audience, you know, do feel free to ask questions in the Q&A and chat boxes if you'd like to. I was just really intrigued by this dialogue between words and images, between your different practices, and you know, you've given us great insight into that. But I suppose, Sam, I was struck by the role of narration and voice and kind of quality of voice in your animations, and I was really moved by the lockdown poem and animation. And I wondered whether it's the rhythm of the words or the voice that sort of leads your drawing in those sorts of collaborations, or whether it's the kind of visual aspect of the poems on the page.
No, in the lockdown, it was definitely driven by the way Richard read his poem, you know, and it was just so moving. You know, another friend of mine who's a writer forwarded to me and said, maybe you could do something with this. And when I first heard it, I was just so moved by it. Also because at the time we were still in lockdown, the first lockdown, and it just seemed like this real voice. I mean, to me, it's an incredible poem. And so I just wanted to make drawings that to me really felt the way that I felt when I first heard that. And then after speaking with him, I was like, you must be so busy. You know, he called me, it was like 4 a.m. his time. And I was like, you must be so busy. I'm surprised you have time to talk. Why would you even be interested in talking to me? And he told me that he's really interested in talking to artists and mystics to know what they're thinking. And, you know, and then the rest of the time he works with, I think, teenagers that are in trouble. You know, so anyone who's in Dublin should reach out to him. He seems like an incredible human. And, you know, you can find him in his other poems, but that was very specific to the language. And that's what also happened in Dennis the Pirate. I ignored it, but then I embraced it. but that was a different thing. Liev Schreiber talked about how he changed the voice, like how it could be presented, but with the lockdown poem, I just wanted to honor that poem.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I don't know, Mary, if you could talk to her a bit more. I was intrigued by the sort of transitions between the visual and the verbal for you, and that idea of sort of the found poem, I guess. But yeah, it was interesting that the sort of found poem, and then these touchstones in the 19th century with Swinburne and Poe, and
Yeah.
that was really fascinating to hear about.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I can say, like, in terms of the found poetry, like the stuff that I was doing with the war memorials, that was at the very beginning when I was starting to just pick up the courage and start writing, really for the first time, like trying to make something that, you know, I felt was worth the trouble, and kind of having that collage and kind of being experienced, you know, having had the experience of making a collage and making a drawing, I think it prepared me to make, you know, word collages, which I found out later there's a word for that. It's called a cento, you know, a poem made out of other words, like kind of a refrigerator magnet style of poetry. And I think that gave me an early technique of experimentation, and then also really did show me in a very material way that you don't really own language, you just borrow it.
Thank you. Yeah. I've just noted a couple of questions from the audience that sort of connect with lots of the discussion. So there's a question about whether you could talk about the differences you experience as artists between exhibiting your work in museums and galleries, in contrast to more sort of democratically, as it were, via social media or street art, and so on.
I don't know, Sam, you want to take that one?
I mean, you did the thing at the Tate, right?
Yeah, I mean, actually, that's kind of a good
That is a
thought,
good
like,
entry point,
because right, the Tate commissioned a piece from us in 2015 that they broadcast live on YouTube. That was like,
yeah, and it was a completely new thing for us.
Yeah.
Catherine Wood just kind of approached us and asked if we wanted to do something performance-wise, and as people as artists who almost entirely work with record, you know, the control of recording everything here in our studio, it was sort of a daunting thing, but also kind of exciting. And this was an interesting first foray into it, which led to something truly live. But yeah, it was a live streamed performance, real time, early version of a piece called Is Offal, which was developed into a larger video.
yeah.
And it was strange in terms of the question. It was a little odd because that form of live streaming, you're kind of like doing a Zoom talk, you really are almost perfectly unaware of the audience. I mean, we were just in our small space doing this performance piece. We knew there was an audience, but it was, we were very cloistered off from knowing anything about it during the process. It was sort of afterwards that we sort of became aware of what it really was.
You know, I would just say to that question that I really embrace having, you know, being able to find work like I found the lockdown poem, or seeing work or finding people's work that I would have no way of seeing before this. What I don't understand personally is when it's used for like people putting up works in progress. To me, that brings back the worst of like being in school. It's like making work by committee. It's like, if you get enough likes, oh, I'm going to follow this direction, as opposed to actually making something on your own. So I think as a platform to try to actually engage with people that you would have no other way of knowing, it's an amazing tool.
Yeah.
And
But I think your advice just there is like priceless. And that is really one of the things that I remember from you the most. When we got to Yale, you said the most important piece of equipment in your studio is the door. You can shut it. And I just like, I really, really never forgot that. And like, I remember when Pat and I shot our first video, it was called Camel Toe. It was a very rude video, very short. It was about a vibrator. And like we didn't show it to anybody. I didn't show it to anybody until we were ready, like maybe a couple months later. And I just think that, and actually to circle this back to like, one of my problems with social media is there's no door on it, because it gets into your head and you're constantly thinking about it and you're constantly like wondering what's going to happen the next time you open up the app. It's really difficult to kind of truly forget that it's there.
Yeah.
Like all these, we're just talking about the ideology of a museum and of standing in front of a war memorial, and these places all really want something from you very specific, but they have doors too. You can leave and not be in that ideological space anymore. And I guess, my only advice to a student would be like, try to build a door on your social media so you don't constantly have to have it in your head.
Yeah, it sort of dismantles that strength that you have of being able to make work just for yourself with no intention of showing it to anyone, just as a process of learning. It sort of tries to make the assumption for you that no, everything should be shared, and it's just not true. I mean, it's just not, and it's not necessarily helpful.
Sort of constantly being on stage in a way.
Yeah, constantly performing, which that's not good for anyone.
Yeah, I was struck also by the importance of humor, in your work, and wordplay, and to make really powerful points and sort of critique. And I've just noticed there's someone else is asking a question as a related question about satire, and whether you could elaborate on the role of satire in your work. Do you have explicit strategies for how you relate your ideas satirically? Do you see satire as an answer to propaganda?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think satirical genius is one of the most precious forms of genius. I think that might be a quote from T.S. Eliot or something like that. Like the satirical genius is the rarest kind. And of course you have a big Hogarth show up right now, right at Tate, and which I wish I could see, because of course he's, of course, one of the greatest satirical heroes you can have. And I mean, yeah, I guess like, okay, so I'm trying to gather my thoughts. I guess the way that somebody like Hogarth, or like some of the great political cartoonists like Daumier, they did make work that was very politically contemporary. So like someone reading the newspapers or the print media at the time would be able to follow who was being made fun of and everything. And so a lot of that political satire tends to be quite topical. And I guess when we are satirical, or we try to think, because we're not making cartoons, we don't have a daily strip in the newspaper. So I guess one thing we ask ourselves is like, how can we bring that sensibility of satire and of kind of rudeness and mockery of the powerful or whatever, how can we like bring that into a more lasting or long time frame? Because I think that is one of the differences between like political satire and art. The political satire is like more closely tied to the daily, and art is supposed to try to make connections between time periods. So that's why so although satire is very important, I would revert back to probably a more important mode for us, which is parody. And so like, so there's a connection to works of the past, like Swinburne, like Hogarth, who's absolutely been an influence and influenced our This Is Awful piece that we did for Tate quite a bit. So we're like trying to take from these kind of satirical masters and parody them. And parody is, I think, interesting because you, in order to make fun of something and update it and bring it into the present, you really have to study them. And in that period of study, you make kind of an homage to them. So it's a double-edged sword. It's respectful because you're really trying to understand them and making a study of them, but you're also tweaking them and poking fun at them at the same time.
And I think parody also for us extends to like the whole work in terms of the videos we make, because like I alluded to earlier, the sets are sort of parodies of film sets. The videos themselves are kind of parodies of certain aspects of cinema itself. So we're kind of extending that idea of parody from the text into the visuals and everything. Parody. We made a parody of that museum space at the Gardner for the set for the Rape of Europa. We can easily describe it as something post-apocalyptic, but really its first level, it's a parody of their courtyard space that they have, which we studied extensively and wanted to make our own version.
Well, thank you so much for your reflections and your meditations on teaching too, as well as sharing your work. It's been really fascinating for all of us, and lots of appreciation from the audience to you all. So thanks once again to Sam, Mary, and Patrick.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. And it was so great to spend time with you too.
Yeah.
One of the joys of teaching is you make friends.
Yes.
No, and you're a master friend maker as well as a master teacher and drawer.
Well, anyway, thank you. And thank Catherine for inviting us all.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you.